Right now, a piece of software inside your device is making roughly 10,000 decisions per second on your behalf. It decides which programs get to exist, which get to speak to the internet, and which get silently executed in the background without your knowledge. You call it an operating system. I call it a dictator you never elected. Welcome to all of operating systems. You'll learn how a tiny piece of code called the kernel seizes absolute power every time you press the power button, why your computer's memory is a battlefield where programs fight to the death over fractions of a second, and how the single most dangerous thing in your digital life is not a virus. It's the operating system itself, growing fatter and more vulnerable with every automatic update you didn't ask for. This is not a tech tutorial. This is the biography of the invisible government that runs your life. When you press the power button, a tiny program called the bootloader wakes up. It is not the operating system. It's more like the midwife. It finds the kernel, the core of the OS, and loads it into memory, then hands over complete control. In that moment, a coup d'etat occurs. The kernel takes possession of the CPU, the memory, the storage, every input and output device. The hardware that was, a moment ago, a democracy of electrons becomes a dictatorship of code. The kernel runs in a privileged mode called kernel space. Nothing happens without its permission. User programs, your browser, your game, your text editor, live in user space, a kind of digital public housing where they are denied direct access to the hardware. If a program wants to read a file, it must beg the kernel via a system call. The kernel receives the request, verifies the program's identity, and either grants access or denies it. This is the fundamental architecture of every modern operating system, a supreme authority surrounded by supplicants. The kernel is not a manager. It's an absolute monarch that has never once stepped down. Memory is the most contested resource in the kingdom. Every program wants as much RAM as possible, and the kernel must decide who gets it, who shares it, and who gets evicted when space runs out. This is managed by a subsystem called the memory manager. The kernel uses virtual memory, a brilliant deception that makes each program believe it has an entire contiguous block of memory all to itself, when in reality it's sharing physical RAM with dozens of others, constantly being swapped in and out. When physical memory runs low, the kernel starts killing. On Linux, it's called the OOM killer, the out-of-memory killer. It selects a process, often based on a score of how much memory it's using and how long it's been running, and terminates it. No appeal, no warning, just a silent digital execution. And here's the dark irony. The program you care about most, the one you're actively working in, is often the first to die because it's been using the most memory. The kernel is not fair, it's efficient. Fairness is a user space illusion. The CPU can only do one thing at a time, or in modern multi-core systems, a handful of things. Yet you feel like everything is happening simultaneously. That illusion is maintained by the scheduler, a part of the kernel that decides thousands of times per second which process gets to run on the CPU for the next few milliseconds. The scheduler uses time slices so short that a human cannot perceive the gaps. Your music player gets a slice, then your email client, then your cursor movement. The decisions are made at nanosecond scale, and they are brutal. High-priority processes get preferential treatment. Low-priority background tasks are starved for cycles. The scheduler is the ultimate temporal dictator, deciding who lives in the future and who is condemned to wait. And here's the twist. The scheduler itself is a process. The thing that decides who gets to run is also competing for resources. The dictator is subject to its own rules, and the recursion of that is the kind of thing that keeps OS developers awake at night. The kernel manages not just memory and CPU, but also the permanent storage, your hard drive or SSD. It does this through a file system, which is less like a filing cabinet and more like an infinite library where every book is constantly being rewritten. The file system organizes data into files and directories, but underneath that abstraction is chaos. Data is scattered across the physical disk in fragments. The file system maintains an index, a table of contents, so that when you double-click a document, it can reassemble the fragments in the correct order and hand you a seamless whole. This is called the virtual file system, and it's another deception. The most dangerous moment is not when you delete a file. It's when you think you've deleted a file. The kernel simply marks that space as available, leaving the data intact until something overwrites it. This is why digital forensics exists. The operating system never truly destroys anything. It just forgets where it put it. The ghost of every file you've ever deleted is still on your disk, waiting to be resurrected by anyone who knows how to read the raw memory. An operating system that can't communicate is a brain in a jar. The network stack lets your device talk to everything else in the world, organized in layers, each one wrapping the message in another envelope. The kernel negotiates with foreign machines, rebuilding lost packets, maintaining a conversation across a global web of routers. And when it fails, the silence is absolute. Every digital connection you rely on, your bank, your loved ones, your medical records, is just a stream of packets the kernel could stop forwarding at any instant. And now, beneath that network, the villain fully emerges. Not a hacker, not a bug, but the complexity spiral. Every operating system, as it ages, accumulates features. Backward compatibility, new hardware support, security patches. Each one adds more code. More code means more bugs. More bugs require more patches. The spiral tightens. Windows, macOS, Linux, each contains tens of millions of lines of code, grown over decades by thousands of contributors who often never spoke to one another. No single human being understands the entire system anymore. The operating system has passed beyond comprehension, yet it guards the gates to your entire digital existence. The network stack that connects you to the world is built on a foundation that not even its architects fully grasp. The complexity that keeps you safe is also the thing that makes you infinitely vulnerable. Why do we accept this dictator? Why do we surrender absolute control to a piece of software we cannot audit, cannot escape, and cannot stop from growing ever more complex? The answer is that the alternative is worse. Without an operating system, the hardware is inert silicon. You would have to write machine code for every task, managing memory addresses and CPU registers by hand. The operating system is the translator that turns human intention into machine action. It is, for all its flaws, a miracle of abstraction. But the deeper answer is that we no longer have a choice. The entire digital ecosystem, every application, every website, every service, is built on top of a handful of operating systems. To reject the operating system is to reject modern digital life. You are not a customer, you are a captive, and the prison is comfortable enough that you've forgotten the doors are locked. Here's the emotion I want to leave with you. Not anger, not wonder, uneasy dependency. The feeling you have when you realize that the ground beneath your digital feet is maintained by a system that no single human understands, that is growing more fragile and more bloated with every passing year, and that you cannot leave even if you wanted to. You trust your operating system with your passwords, your private messages, your financial records, your location data, the rhythm of your heartbeat if you wear a smartwatch. You have never read the code. You have never met the developers. You have simply accepted that when you press the power button, the dictator wakes up and takes control. And every single day, without your explicit consent, it runs thousands of processes, some of them talking to servers you've never heard of, updating itself in ways you can't prevent. You are a digital subject. The operating system is your sovereign, and sovereignty, once given, is almost impossible to reclaim. So, you just learned that your device is a dictatorship that holds elections every millisecond, and the kernel always wins. It manages memory by executing the programs you care about most, schedules CPU time with the impartial cruelty of a cosmic clockmaker, and has grown so complex that no human alive understands the whole thing. If this video made you glance nervously at your phone, good. That means you're paying attention. Subscribe. You will never meet the kernel that runs your life, but it knows exactly who you are, and it doesn't care. It just runs.